And hello, welcome to Stream City Radio, streamcity.org, and Stream City Sports on the YouTube channel as we dive into things and continue our look into the strongest conference. And I know there's you've got the SEC defenders out there saying SEC is still the strongest. You got the Big Ten and most of college football saying, no, the Big Ten's passed them. Well, the numbers we looked at in the Big Ten show don't really show that to be true. Has a gap closed? Absolutely. Is a SEC as dominant as it's been? No. But still the numbers, and we'll see how it all plays out as the rest of this goes on. But the numbers for the Big Ten versus the SEC did still favor the Big Ten. Now let's roll the ACC into the equation and see how that affects numbers. It's not going to change the numbers for them, but how do they stack up? How does my particular formula for figuring this stuff out, does it get more validated? Does it, so just taking a deep dive into the ACC in non-conference play and then comparing it to the SEC and the Big Ten. And then, of course, on Monday, we will do the Big 12. So anyhow, here we go. Diving in, and we'll give the same examples we've given in case this is the first show you have listened to or watched. Basically, the things that didn't matter. Games against the FCS. We're not counting those unless you lost, which so far nobody has. Bowl games. Don't care. Not the same team you played the regular season with. Doesn't really matter. It's a terrible data point. Playoffs. Why? Because we're not getting equal number of teams in, and this is measuring the conference top to bottom, and that's really only ever going to be a measurement of the top of the conference. And you're getting 4 from one team, 4 from one conference, 1 from another. It's not a dependable data point. And hey, if we had 4 from every conference, yes, then we could weigh that in, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But, and some people would say, well, the SEC had more teams in, that favors them. No, not really. Actually, if you've got one team in that does better, that favors you massively. So, and then last year it was more Big Ten than less SEC. So, to me, the playoffs at this particular point, may not always be this way, but this particular point are not a great data point to look at. So basically what we're looking at is games against other Power 5 conferences and games against the Group of 5. And it is weighted. So we put everybody into tiers. Top 2 teams in the conference are tier 1. Bottom 2 teams in a power conference are tier 8. Everybody else falls in the middle. The Big Ten with 18 teams has an additional team in tier 4 and tier 5, and the ACC has an additional team in tier 4. So that kind of is the long and short of it, examples of how this plays out. We'll look at a couple of them. Georgia Marshall. Georgia was a 1 seed at home playing level 1. Marshall comes at a level 10 team. So Georgia, we're going off a median score of 12. Georgia starts off with a 3 because they're giving 9 points away. They win by 38 points, which earns them back 13 points, giving them a total of 16. So 4 to the positive. Georgia Tech, neutral site game. Georgia the 1. And Tech comes in a tier 3 team. So Georgia's giving them 2 points immediately. So it comes in there as and it's at a neutral site. For a 7-point victory at a neutral site, Georgia wins 2 points. So we end up with a push in that situation. They both end up with 12. So no win for either conference. Then finally, Texas-Ohio State. Ohio State, clearly one of the best 2 teams in the Big Ten. They come as a tier 1. Texas comes in as a tier 3. It is a road game for the Longhorns. They lose by 7 on the road at Ohio State. They were getting 2 points for being 2 tiers lower, and Ohio State earns back 1 of those for a 7-point victory at home. So it's still a slight victory for the SEC, and that's how this whole thing plays out. We go down to tier 12 in the Group of 5. The American Conference starts out at a tier 5. The other Group of 5 conferences start out as a tier 6. So there you go. Top 2 teams, the tier 1 teams in the ACC, Virginia and Miami. and Virginia only played 2 games that count because one of their non-conference games technically was NC State. So, and then they had a FCS game they played as well. Opener against Coastal Carolina, have a great outing, 48-7. Home game, it's a 1 tier versus a 9 tier. They earned 13 points for the 31-point victory, and that puts them at a 17 for their total. Washington State comes in, not quite as good for the Cavaliers, as they do win the ball game, 22-20. It is a home game. Washington State, I ranked the Independents according to their record, so they come in as a Tier 8 ball club. So you get no points for that. And you're giving up 7, so it's actually, in the way we're doing this, actually comes away with a 5. So your total overall score, Virginia is a 22, averages out to 11, and puts them in a situation where they're just below the median threshold we're shooting for, which is 12. Next up, Miami, your runner-up for the national title, comes in and opens up with Notre Dame. It's a home game. Notre Dame's a Tier 2 squad. So you're giving up a pair of points. Or you're giving up 1 point. You get nothing for the win because it's a 3-point win at home. We assume that. So you get no bonus points for that. So that's actually an 11. So it's actually a slight loss for the ACC in this one, simply because Notre Dame was a tier lower. Miami now plays South Florida, who was coming in hot off the win against Florida, looking great, and Miami smokes them. 49-12, the final in this ball game. But South Florida comes in as a Tier 7 squad coming out of the American Conference. So you earn back 11 points. You're giving away 6. You end up with 17 overall. But still a great score for Miami in that one. Then Florida comes in. Rivalry game, end of the season, is 26-7 victory. Once again, the problem here for the ACC is it's a Tier 1 versus a Tier 6 team out of the SEC. You're giving away 5, you earn 5, so it's a push. It's much like the Georgia and Georgia Tech game. It ends up being a push for the 2 conferences. So you end up even. Your total is a 40. You end up with 13.3, which is very much in line with what we saw out of both the SEC and the Big Ten, as it's a little bit harder for these highly tiered teams, especially 1 and 2 tier teams, because they're giving away so many at the beginning. The point totals aren't necessarily as high. So that's where we end up. You're right in line with 13.3 is exactly what Georgia scored. It's a little bit higher than Ole Miss. I think it's might have been exactly what Ohio State had, right in the ballpark with Ohio State. Indiana was the leader in that, but they were right in the ballpark as well. So that's kind of where everybody ended up. So right now you got Virginia a little bit behind, and Miami right there in line with the other Tier 1 ball clubs. When we look at Tier 2 teams for the ACC, we're looking at SMU, and we're looking at Pittsburgh. SMU, high hopes coming into the season. Didn't play badly, but didn't play great non-conference play. And that's what really kind of hurt the ACC in this, is they had some teams that finished at the top of this conference that did really poorly outside of the conference. SMU is one of them. SMU comes in here, they lose to Baylor in the opener, and they're a two-tier team. Baylor's a Tier 6 out of the Big 12. They actually are going to lose 2 points on this because it was a loss at home. So you add that to what they were already giving away, and you get 6 points out of this. Missouri State comes rolling in. You win it 28-10, not impressively. Once again, it's a Tier 2 versus Tier 8. You're giving away 5. You're giving away 6. You earn back 5, 11. Finally finish up with TCU, big rivalry game. You lose it. You were at TCU, so that saves you a little bit. So you're Tier 3. I mean, you're giving away 3 as a tier 2 versus a tier 5. You lose another 2 for the loss on the road, so you get a 7. So the numbers are terrible for SMU when you look at this. It was a 24 total for the three games you played for an average of 8, which is way below what the other 2 big conferences did at tier 2. As we scroll down and look at Pittsburgh, who was a team that was kind of hot and cold this year, but unfortunately for the ACC, once again played some of their worst ball outside of the conference. And this is kind of a theme we're seeing with the ACC. Central Michigan comes in, you blast them. It's a 45-17, not a close ball game. It's a 2-tier versus 8-tier situation. You get 8 points for the win. You were giving away 2, so you were giving away 6. So you end up with 14 overall. Not a bad number. To me, 14 and up, you really did well. 12 to 14, you did above average, but nothing extremely impressive, unless we're talking about a couple really top tier teams. Pair of 1s going at it, pair of 2s going at it. That changes it a little bit. Then you go to West Virginia, get beat on the road, saves you a little bit because you're giving away. It's a tier 2 versus tier 7. You lose a point for the loss. You end up with a 6 overall. Then it's Notre Dame, which was a complete train wreck. Notre Dame needed it, knew they needed it, and played like they needed it. 37-15 loss this time. 2-tier versus 2-tier, so you're getting nothing, giving nothing for the on the tier system, and you lose 8 points for getting blown out at home. So you end up with a 4. So your overall total for Pittsburgh, just like we talked about with SMU, is a 24. You get an 8, which gives you an 8, and that's about half what the other conferences were doing. So this is a problem for the ACC, not really stacking up at tier 2. And the tiers aren't end-all, be-all, but they're just one of the data points we're going to look at. But right now, you're not in great shape here at tier 2. Tier 3, you got Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech went out, and this was a great win for Tech because of the way they played at the beginning of the ball game. They do beat Colorado 27-20 on the road, but you're only getting 2 points for 7-point road victory. So it's a 3 versus 8. You're giving away 5 points. You're actually losing 3 in this situation. So you end up with a 9. And that's the only flaw in this is it is just black and white numbers, but it takes the passion out of it as far as, opinions and all that. But you end up with a 9. Well, it was a better than a 9 win for Georgia Tech. But when we're just comparing conferences, you kind of have to strip all that away. And it is about how teams compete against teams from different levels in other conferences. So you end up with a 9. Temple comes in. It's an easy win, 45-24. Once again, it's a tier 3 versus a tier 9 in this particular ball game. And you get 6 points back for that. And so you're going to end up with an 11 overall in the grand scheme of things as I fix my score there. And then you play Georgia. We covered this in the examples. Georgia's a tier 1. You're a tier 3. You're getting 2 points. You lose 2 points for the neutral site loss. So you end up with a wash. So the total for Tech ends up being a 32, which gives them a 10.7 overall for Tech, and another time when they're just not reaching that medium break-even point of a 12. Duke, and this was, we knew, the thing is we knew how badly Duke played against Illinois. That was a huge data point for the Big Ten. 45-19 loss at home. You're a tier higher. Illinois was a 4-tier. You were a 3-tier. You lose 10 points on the loss. You're giving away a point. You get 1. Not as bad as Kentucky-Louisville. We'll talk about that one in a minute, but it's pretty bad. That is not where you want to be. Go on the road and lose to Tulane. Now, Tulane, coming out of the American, is a Tier 5. You're a Tier 3, so you're only giving away 2 points in this situation. And Tulane, with the 7-point victory at home, only gets they only get 1 point for that. But you still end up at a 9. Not a great place to be if you're Duke. Then you have Connecticut, who ended up being a Tier 6 team, and had a great season. Connecticut, all 3 of their regular season losses were overtime losses, and so they're 1-score losses. This was not one of them, however, as they beat Duke. Now, it was at Connecticut, so that helps you a little bit. You actually end up with a 3-point loss. You're on the road, and it's a push. You're not giving any points. You're not getting any points. You're not losing any points, more importantly. But you were losing 3 points for being 3 tiers higher, with it being a 3-tier versus 6-tier. So you end up with another 9. You end up with 19 points overall, which ends up with a 6.3, and that's our lowest total we've had for anybody yet. So, once again, the ACC falling further behind the other 2 conferences as we compare them. NC State is your first of your 4-tier teams, along with Clemson. And we actually had, let's see, NC State, Clemson, and Cal. Yeah, I'm scrolling right back to Cal. Now, start out with NC State. Of course, as we said earlier, they had the 1 game against Virginia, which was technically a non-conference game, but you really can't use that in this equation because it'd be a complete and total push for the conference. So you've only got two data points here. One of them is the East Carolina squad that performed really well in the American and ended up being a Tier 6 squad. So you're 4 versus 6. So you're giving away 2 points. You get the win, but it's at home. You only win 1 point back in this situation. So you're still underwater at an 11. Now you go to Notre Dame and lose 36-7. This is a 4 versus 2, so you're getting a couple points, but you're losing 9 for the outcome of the ball game. So you end up with a total of 5. So between the 2 of those, once again, we got the ACC well below what the other conference is doing. And this is a number that keeps coming up. At a total of 16, it's an 8, which is 4 points below the median of a 12. So not at all where you want to be if you're the ACC. Next up, California. And they do have 3 games on here. Let's see. Oregon State to open it up. And it's a 34-15 victory. So 4 versus 9. You get 7 points. Once again, we're back to a push. It's a 12-point situation for California and the ACC. Minnesota, who is a 4-tier, so you're even here, not giving anything away. Now, this is a big win and one of the better feathers in the cap that we've come to so far anyhow for the ACC in beating Minnesota 27-14. Now, it's at home, so you're not getting as many points, but you do get 3. You get them all because you're not giving anything away for the tier breakdown, so you end up with a 15, which is actually one of the better numbers that the ACC has been able to put up. And then finally, you have let's see, you have California versus San Diego. It's a 34-0 loss. You're giving away 3 tiers. It's Tier 4 versus Tier 7. You're also giving away 9 points to San Diego State for the loss. You end up with 0. Nothing. You score nothing there. So you get 27 points, saving grace is what you did against Minnesota, but still only puts you at a 9 overall because of the goose egg against very similar to what we saw with Kentucky, where you had one really bad outing that just sank your ship. And, the push and then a positive against the Big Ten, but overall not enough to pull you above sea level here. Clemson, major disappointment for the ACC. That loss against LSU, a 7-point loss at home, cost you 2 points. You were also giving away 1 point because LSU's a Tier 5 team out of the SEC. And so you end up with 9 points overall for the loss at home. Then you get a win over Troy, but it's not an impressive win over Troy, 27-6. Now, Troy was a pretty good team out of the Sun Belt Conference, but it's still a 4 versus 7. So you're giving away 3 points. You earn 3 points, so you're going to push 12 points overall. Then you get the win against South Carolina at South Carolina. This one you're giving away 4 points because South Carolina is a Tier 8 team out of the SEC. But you do win 6 for the road victory, the 14-point road victory. So that puts you +2 for a total of 14 and brings you in just below the median line of 12 at 11.7 for the 3 games. So that's where we're at as we talk about the top half of the ACC. Now, how does that compare to the other conferences? The numbers were not good, but how bad were they when you compare it directly to the SEC and the Big Ten? Tier 1 teams. Big Ten slightly won this 14.5 over the SEC's 13.2. The ACC came in with a push of a 12 between the 2 teams. This is a place where Miami bailed them out. Tier 2 teams. Now, this was a bit of a disaster for the ACC. 16.75 for the Big Ten was a huge number. The SEC comes in just above break even at 12.3, but the ACC comes in at an 8. So less than half performance points against the Big Ten. And, 2/3 of what the SEC did. Tier 3, the SEC takes this one, 15-14 over the Big Ten. But once again, distant third is the ACC with 7.3 points. Then we have Tier 4. This one also a victory for the SEC with 17.3. Huge number for the SEC with their Tier 4 teams. The best one they put up, actually the best we've had out of the top tier so far. But the Big Ten performed pretty well. I take that back. The Big Ten fell off and no. They performed pretty well in this one. I was looking at the numbers wrong. 15.3 for the Big Ten. So also well above what we've been seeing. Matter of fact, when I look at it, the only score that's better out of it is the Tier 2 performance by the Big Ten. And then the ACC finally gets their head above water with a 12.7. But still far behind the other 2 conferences, where we're starting to see the SEC and the Big Ten start to put up big numbers as we reach kind of the middle of this. And that's kind of always been the argument the SEC's made. We may be close to the top guys, but as we get down towards the bottom, the SEC is going to be superior. The Big Ten's definitely, when you look at this, has closed that gap. Yes, the SEC slightly ahead of them in Tier 3 and Tier 4. And this doesn't tell the whole story. And we'll dig further into that because you've got to look at how much of those numbers are coming from the Group of 5 and what's coming from the Power 5, because that makes a difference too. But when you just look at the raw numbers here, the SEC getting outperformed at Tier 1 and 2 slightly by the Big Ten, actually by a good number at Tier 2. And then the ACC and the SEC kind of flipping the script on them when they get down to Tier 3 and 4. The clear thing here, the only place that the SEC, ACC, and Big Ten are really even close is Tier 1, where it's a 13.2, a 14.5, and a 12. the ACC falls way off at tier 2 and 3, and then gets back in the game somewhat, but because the ACC and Big Ten are doing so well, even being a 12.7 doesn't compare to the numbers they're putting up. We'll look at the bottom half of the conference as we come back here. Hope this is making sense. We'll kind of put a recap and a bow on the whole thing after the next segment of the show or the next podcast if you were watching the podcast. Of course, this one dropped on Friday at 6. Part 2 will drop on Saturday at 6 p.m. Hope you're enjoying the show. Be back in just a moment with more on Stream City Radio, streamcity.org, and Stream City Sports. Here with your host, James O'Brien.